Yes, and so with that, I want to move us to our next really incredible panel and welcome the next set of esteemed speakers for our panel, Breakthrough Journalism, Strategies for Covering the Climate Crisis. Thank you all for your important work. In this age of disinformation, distraction, and deliberate denial, journalism plays a critical role in shaping public understanding and public action on the climate crisis and many other issues. But too often, mainstream narratives ignore the root causes of the crisis and erase the voices of those most impacted. Climate journalism, climate justice journalism in specific, demands more than reporting on disasters or emission targets. It tells the truth about power, exposes the violence of extraction, uplifts frontline solutions, and holds the systems of oppression to account. The storytellers we need now are those who can break through apathy and fear and help us imagine what's possible. In a time when authoritarian governments and corporate interests are actively suppressing truth, this kind of journalism is an act of resistance. Today's panelists are movement builders, truth tellers, and bridge makers, and I'm really looking forward to learning from them how media can amplify climate justice struggles, deepen accountability, and support transformative change. Not just headlines, but also our heartlines that actually move people to act. This session will be moderated by my dear friend and colleague, Antonia Juhasz, who is an outstanding investigative journalist, author, and lecturer, and she just does amazing work, and we're so honored to have her here. Thank you, Antonia, for introducing our panelists and guiding us through a vital conversation about the role of journalism and the climate crisis. And I hand the floor to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Osprey. It's so wonderful to be with you, and thank you for that fantastic introduction. And it's so amazing to follow the first panel and to be joined by such an incredible group of women, both in the panel and in the audience. So thank you all, particularly those joining us and watching, for being here today. I want to welcome you again to the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice, Path to COP30 and Beyond, organized by Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, popularly known as WECAN. Thank you, Osprey, for your introduction. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our panel of truly badass women journalists from around the world discussing breakthrough journalism, strategies for covering the climate crisis. As Osprey kindly introduced me, I am Antonia Juhasz, and I'm an independent investigative journalist, primarily writing these days for Rolling Stone magazine. I cover energy, climate, and frontline communities in resistance to the fossil-fueled world order. I'm also the founder of Uncovering Oil, which supports my work. I'm joining you today from Washington, D.C. in Turtle Island, and I am excited to serve as your moderator for today's panel. You'll hear from incredible women conducting breakthrough journalism around the world, providing critical accountability reporting on the climate crisis, those causing and advancing it, and the hard work being done every day by frontline communities, social movements, and others to advance a healthy, just, and sustainable world. Our panelists join us today from Costa Rica, Mexico, Kenya, Egypt, and Turtle Island. For the benefit of providing time for discussion, I encourage you to please read their full bios provided with links on the Assembly website so that I can limit myself to mainly titles for now and their introductions. After each speaker presents and the full panel is done, I'll lead a 20-minute discussion with the full panel. Our panel takes place amid a truly unprecedented moment for women, for feminists, journalists, and the inhabitants of our Earth. The rise of authoritarian and fascistic leaders throughout the world and here in the United States is eroding democracy, emboldening the fossil fuel industry, increasing lawlessness, and daily threatens lives, livelihoods, and our futures. Our ability to do our jobs boldly and with the fierceness, accuracy, and authority that the times demand, while also protecting our sources, ourselves, and our profession, is uniquely under threat, and globally, it is increasingly deadly. The news cycle is truly relentless, a clear strategy of the Trump administration, among others. I'm just back from a reporting trip and working on a new article, speaking to you, and also glued to the US Senate, awaiting a vote on likely the most regressive US tax and budget law in at least the past 4 decades, if not ever. Many journalists and outlets are also acquiescing to Trump and other regimes globally, moving backwards and ceding ground on how we report on the climate crisis, climate and environmental justice, fossil fuels, elected officials, the industry, and equity writ large. Areas that we have fought for a very long time and that have been hard to obtain. And in the midst of it all, a statistic I've been sharing with this forum for many years is holding steady, with only 20% of those quoted as experts in major media outlets being women, meaning that we are not learning from critical voices that we need in order to not only merely hold steady, but advance. That said, there is good news, and the journalists gathered here today are able to bring it. They're doing the work, and in many places, the US included, our democracy is holding strong, as is our profession. We're using tools obtained through reporting in restrictive and dangerous environments. I know I've tapped into my own experiences reporting from Afghanistan and other nations reporting now here, and increased our solidarity to move forward. Today, we'll hear strategies from the experts working across the planet. Let me introduce you to them now in the order that they'll be speaking. Joining us from Costa Rica is Amy Westervelt, the executive editor of Drilled, a multimedia investigative newsroom focused on climate accountability. From Mexico is Catalina Ruiz Navarro, a Colombian Caribbean feminist activist and journalist living in Mexico City. She is the editor-in-chief of the feminist Latin American magazine Volcanica and the co-creator of Amazona TV. From Kenya is Elizabeth Kahurani, a digital strategist and climate communications specialist who serves as the Network Director Africa for the Global Strategic Communications Council, an international collaborative network of communications professionals in the field of climate, energy, and nature. From Egypt is Rahma Diaa, an independent Egyptian writer and journalist and founder of the Climate School Initiative, offering training and workshops to journalists specializing in climate change and the environment across the Middle East and North Africa. And finally, from here in Turtle Island, the incredible Amy Goodman, the host and executive producer of Democracy Now! Thank you all so much for joining us. And now I'll turn it over to Amy Westervelt.
Thanks, Antonia. Thanks everyone for having me. I messed up and I missed the deadline for visuals. Journalist. So I'm gonna just to talk to you about some of the things that I've seen over the past few years in case they're helpful to other people who are trying to do this work. I'm an investigative reporter focused on climate. I've been a reporter for more than 20 years. I started my own organization in 2020 called Drilled, and that grew out of what was supposed to be a limited run podcast that launched in 2018 by the same name, Drilled. So I started out working for a lot of different mainstream media outlets. And I eventually left because I just felt like I couldn't tell the climate stories that I wanted to tell the way I wanted to tell them, working for anyone else, basically. I'm probably not great at having a boss either, let's be honest. But yeah, I really I kept trying to write really well-researched investigative pieces that also held fossil fuel companies to account. And I kept butting up against well, we need to get a statement from the American Petroleum Institute in here, or we need to have you talk to a scientist who doesn't believe that climate change is real. Even in pretty recent history, I had an editor at the Washington Post, at NPR, at very established news organizations say those kinds of things to me in the not so distant past. So I felt like I had to leave to do what I wanted to do. And I was thinking this morning about this convening and realized that I had never really talked or maybe even thought that much about the role that gender also played in that. So at maybe 12 years ago, I had my first, God, he's 13 now. 13 years ago, I had my first kid, and I was freelancing at the time for a bunch of different outlets, doing climate reporting. And I told all my editors that I was going to take a month off. I was having a baby and I was going to take a month off. And more than one of them got really mad. One climate editor in particular, I remember, yelled at me for wasting his time training me when I was just gonna leave and have a baby. So, I ended up, kind of having to restart my career after that. Actually, like I felt like, oh, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have told anyone that this was happening, because now all of my work has gone away and I need to sort of like restart from scratch. So I started, reaching out to new outlets. And at a certain point, was driving around listening to NPR, which is our public radio station in the US, and wishing that I could do radio, and then thinking, well, I probably could. There's probably a member station nearby, and there was. And so I emailed them, and the subject line was, "Would you like an overaged intern?" Because I was, not young at that point. And they said, sure, come on in. And I trained for about a month and then got a job there as a community reporter. So I started doing a lot of audio, and it was great because I had never actually been a community reporter. And I think it's a really important training for people to, especially if you're doing audio, because you have to spend so much time with someone to get good audio. And also you're giving them a voice in a really literal way. So I think it's very important to make sure that you're careful with that voice and that story that they're giving you, that take the time to build a relationship, spend time with them, you know, become a little bit part of their lives for some period of time. So great experience doing that. And then then I got pregnant again, and I realized I had to quit this job because it didn't pay me enough to support a family. So I went back to freelancing, was running around doing all kinds of things. Oops. Sorry.
You're fine.
Running around doing all kinds of things. And then I was, doing a lot of like very boring work and missing audio and wishing I could like come up with some idea. And I got sent to go cover a court case in San Francisco. And I kind of had this idea sitting there that like, this is a story that I could do in a narrative way. It was a climate accountability case. It was San Francisco and Oakland trying to hold the fossil fuel companies accountable for their role in delaying action on climate and the resulting costs of that. And, we had like the scientists and the activists and the judge and the lawyers. And I thought, oh, I'm going to do a true crime podcast about climate change. This is like what I'm going to do. And I thought this was like an amazing idea. And I pitched it to all these podcast companies, and they all said, oh, there's just no audience for that. And I was convinced that they were wrong. And I was also really desperate by this point to have an interesting work project. So I just made it anyway. I, made it in my car at night when my kids were sleeping, and got a friend to help me with the audio engineering, and we launched it. And we got a million listeners in our first season. So I was like, I was right. It was a good idea. But also I tell that story a lot because I think it's a really good example of like, if you really think the story is good and you really think that it's important, find a way to get it out there. Like just make the thing if you can. The other thing quickly, I know I only have 1 minute, is so from that was going to be a tiny little project. Now it's grown into a global newsroom. We have reporters on almost every continent. We're doing cross-border investigations all the time because, again, I feel like this idea I had from local reporting is very global too, that we need to get the microphones in the hands of all of these people who need to be telling their own stories. And yeah, it's been cool to be able to like open that door for other people to do too. Okay, I'll wrap it up. 30 seconds. We're out of time. Okay, next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate you staying tight on the schedule. I am now going to turn it over to Catalina. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Antonia, and thank you for everybody that's
Catalina, you have
here in the
frozen.
audience. I'm a philosopher and journalist from Colombia, but I've been living in Mexico. Oh, now?
You're back now. You might want to cut off your video for just
All right,
a minute, and then that way we won't lose you.
great. I am the founder and director of a feminist journalism magazine called Volcánicas. We do regional coverage, and one of the key things that we are doing is trying to cover this intersection between climate and gender, specifically in Latin America, where we have like very specific issues that have to do with exploitation. And also, one thing that's very important for us in Volcánicas is to have a decolonial perspective in the things that we are investigating. So I just wanted to go through some of the stories that we covered last year and how these stories feature this intersection. This year in January, there was a forest nearby Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia, and it was on fire. This is like one of the situations that climate change has brought in Colombia. And in this moment, we did photojournalist coverage of the fire women that were containing the fires. This was called The Bodies That Contain Los Cuerpos que Contienen el Incendio, The Bodies That Contain the Fire, by Isabela Bernal. Also, with this water crisis in Bogota, which is very complicated because Colombia is the fourth country in the world with more water reservoirs. And Bogota is actually a place that has páramo, and it's very rich in water, but most of this resource is going to private companies like Coca-Cola, and it's not reaching the people that are citizens that live in Bogota. Let me see if my camera will be working now, and if it freezes, I'll shut it down again. In this moment, one of the things that we started covering was how women and girls in Bogota were specifically affected by this because they started doing cuts in water supply to the city, supposedly to save water for the future. But I mean, it didn't work out that way because people just collected more water the day before they were going to cut, so it didn't really work. But here we were talking about how this getting water is one of the main responsibilities for women and girls and their houses, and doing the dishes and doing the laundry, and also how this affects specifically women and girls that are menstruating, and how this complicates their life. Also, we did a profile, a big interview about Yayo Herrero. She's an ecofeminist, Latin American activist, and this was an interview on how, in front of climate crisis, ecofeminisms have to imagine a different future, and that is also possible. This is an interview that's from April 2024, but I think it's very current today because precisely we're facing this uh I think it's Naomi Klein that calls it ends of times fascism, where we have all this billionaires that really believe that the end of the world is coming, and they're preparing for it with their bunkers, or thinking that they can go live in Mars and things like this. And one of the keys of this like horrible line of thought is that they don't think that the planet can be saved, and they are accelerating its end. So I think that Yayo Herrera, her work is amazing because it's also touching on imagination. And even though this is an interview from 1 year ago, I think that now is more current than ever, because it's we also what part of the climate crisis that we have, it's also a crisis of imagination. Also, we did a piece that's called Entre vacas, coca y aguacates, la narcodeforestación arrasa con Latinoamérica. And one of the things that we have been following is how peace processes and the occupation by narco groups are affecting wildlife. And we have seen that you have a double sword there. Because, for example, in Colombia, when we had the armed conflict that ended with the peace process that we had in 2016, of course, there's a lot of violence in Colombia still, but that armed conflict stopped, and we got this negotiation. After that, the occupation of a lot of the guerrilla and narco in the Amazonas was smaller, and that made the deforestation of the Amazon in Colombia's territory to grow. Because at some point this area was just protected because you could not get into it. But as soon as you get the peace process, you see a process of deforestation. And in Mexico, we see something that it's actually pretty much the opposite. And this extension of the narco comes also with deforestation that has to do with the avocado, the growing of avocado in Mexico. So you can see how the narcos, for example, are cutting down forests and burning them down in Michoacan, so that they can take this land to plant avocados, and in places like in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, the same thing happens, so that they can make coca leaf plantations. So it is like a phenomenon that's growing around all of the region, and how this all of these armed conflicts or occupations or criminal bands or narco groups have a direct impact on climate in the region. We were also we also covered in the what's the name, manglares, the mangrove ecocide in Merida. That has to do with privatization of the mangrove, because some rich, very privileged people are appropriating of this land that is public to park their jets. And do this very elite tourism that it's of course privatized, and the impact that this has. In addition, like you can see the mangrove full with yachts, and also how all of the golf courses that they are started making in Merida have this huge impact, because sustaining grass is something that's very, very aggressive, and that takes a lot of water, especially in a place as sunny as Merida, where grass would never be the ideal plant to grow everywhere.
Thank you, Catalina. We're going to need to move on to
Oh, I'm sorry.
Elizabeth, but no, if you just wanted to add some final thoughts on.
No, I just wanted to say that it is women who are the most important human rights defenders and land and territory defenders in Latin America, and they are the first line that is not only fighting for their rights, but for uh, the rights of everybody in this planet and the rights of climate in Latin America. So we really have to keep a close eye on them because it's their work that's sustaining this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catalina. Apologies for having to interrupt. We'll come back with a discussion at the end, and now I'm excited to hand it off to Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Antonia. So pleased to be part of this community and to join us in this really critical conversation of our time with my fellow great panelists. So I'm the Africa Director of the GSCC. As Antonia mentioned before, I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. And as GSCC, as a network, we are a communications network who really are dedicated to working on climate, nature, and energy. And in that mission, we support the community with the value of strategic communications to drive the change we want to see in efforts to address the climate crisis. So we are a bunch of communication specialists, media experts, PR mavens, creatives, strategists, researchers who spend our time really saying, where can communications and strategic communications at that drive the needle in seeing the changes we want to see? And one thing we are really passionate about is working with partners from across various disciplines, scientists, academia, CSOs, scientists, again, governments, decision makers, women, youth, to really need thread and stitch stories that move the needle when it comes to what we need to see happen in dealing with the climate crisis. And our journey in shaping those narratives and building momentum to the changes that we want to see, there are a few things that we have learned that work. One is that solving the climate crisis is like a puzzle. And that puzzle has various elements that need to work together in sync in order to create windows of opportunities that drive the change that we need to see. One of those key elements of the puzzle is the science, right? We need the science, we need the data to underpin most of the arguments, most of the narratives that we are fighting for. And especially so now when, we are back to the time when, climate was questioned, the scientific basis and the reality of the climate crisis was questioned. We are back to where we were back in 15 years ago. And so science become a really key piece that we need to ensure that we work with to ensure that the integrity and the credibility of it speaks to what needs to be done and the cause of the climate crisis. But science data cannot stand on its own. It needs other elements to it. And a critical element to the science is the context, right? So we need to work with the voices. We need to work with local communities, local experts, local, women, youth who are affected and can see how the climate crisis is impacting on them in real time. And in our work, especially in Africa, those are the voices that mostly are not brought to the fore, right? A lot of time is experts. Sometimes we did a survey looking at, for example, international media who speaks about climate in Africa. And surprising, it's not the Africans. A lot of times it's experts who work in Africa or on Africa are the ones that get to be heard in various international media. And so we have to change that, realizing that local voices, local leaders, local women are experts in their own right. They have the real, the lived realities of how climate is affecting them, and they can bring that local perspective and in a way that is persuasive. And so we've really been working in elevating and positioning these voices to influence the changes we need to see. The other critical element of the puzzle is, of course, the politics, right? And that's why context is so important, because in our surveys as well, one thing we've come to realize is that context varies from one place to another. And so surveys we've done in Africa to really understand how climate is perceived and how salient climate is, we've found that for a lot of people, climate ranks third or fifth on the list of their basic priorities, right? First is jobs, health, education, food, right? And so climate comes because ranks a bit lower when it comes to those needs. And so when you want to shape narratives and stories around climate, you cannot treat climate as a silo issue. You have to find ways of integrating climate with these issues that people care about. How will taking action on climate, for example, bringing in renewable energy, help in generating more jobs? How will taking action to deal with the climate crisis help address issues on food security? How is climate change affecting our health? So we've really worked with the media, we've worked with editors to see how do we mainstream climate in the newsroom coverage, so that editors who are looking to cover climate, they do not just do that during disasters or when we have events like COPs, but they do that from a lens of culture, sports, politics, economics. And that has really helped in bringing salience to the climate issues and helping communities to really be the custodians of the climate story and the climate crisis, how it's affecting them, and how they hold leaders to account to make them do what is needed. And especially now when we are dealing with a different crop of politicians. And so when it comes to also the politics, linking climate to what politicians sometimes care about, because most of them care about how do we grow our economies, how do we develop. And in that mindset, sometimes climate is pitted as an enemy of development, right? But how do we convince this group of audiences that actually, if you take action on climate, it will actually help you accelerate economically development. And in places like Africa, where emissions are, 0 to 4%, they don't see take action on climate to reduce emissions as persuasive, because there are no emissions to reduce. But if you come in with the point that if you take action, you will actually develop economically, it will give you a lead to develop economically, but it will also put you on a pathway where you develop on a low emission carbon pathway, because Africa is growing. Global South is growing economically. We do not want to repeat the mistakes of historic polluters. And so that's how we work with a lot of scientists, media, to make sure we are shaping the stories and the narratives in ways that they land. And I'll stop it there because I see I'm out of time. Over to you, Antonia.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So wonderful to hear from you. Rahma, over to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rahma Diaa. I'm a freelancer journalist based in Egypt and a media trainer, and I am the founder of Climate School Initiative. And also, I'm a member of Covering Climate Now jury for 3 years now, after I won the prize in its first round. And from my experience in the field, I would like to share some strategies when we judge the works. For example, what make the what are the considerations that make excellent reports? What we are trying to train journalists from Middle East and North Africa, climate journalists from the region to do to make excellent work. Let me, in the beginning, tell you a little more about Climate School. It's a media initiative and education platform launched in July 2021. We are working to support journalists from the Middle East and North Africa by training journalists, by production grant, by making the largest library of resources in Arabic language about climate journalism, because in our region there is a lack of resources in Arabic language, there is lack in training in Arabic language, and also platforms which interested in publishing climate stories not only during the COP time but all over the year. So what we are trying to do in Climate School is to create these opportunities. And our last project, for example, to do this is climate journalism diploma. It's a 6-month diploma, and it's the first in its kind in our region. We started the first round from February, and the last session was in June, and we are now in the next step. We supervise the participant to allow them to produce in-depth stories after they took the diploma, and the sessions, the topic of the sessions, we are working on it during the diploma. Solution journalism, how to create climate solution stories, because opinion polls shows that when we talk all the time about the bad news, about the disaster, the readers stop to follow. So we also need to focus on the solutions approach. The sessions also includes how to humanize climate stories, how like Elizabeth was talking about, we need to talk to the stakeholders, we need to talk the normal people, because they are the one who affected by the climate change. So we need to tell their stories and bring their voices to the media. The sessions also include about how to use data and how to analyze data to make the report more depth and more credibility, how to use open source, how to make visualization, because we need more multimedia stories, we need more video stories, we need also different format like podcast, like social media content, because our audience is not all the same. We have different categories from the audience, so we need also to make different formats of content about climate crisis to attract the attention of different audience and different people. We also train journalists how to use the AI to facilitate their work, but maintain that to maintain the credibility, and other sessions. And the next project I want to mention is the Climate School Award for Arab Journalism, because there wasn't before Arab Award for the climate journalism. So we created this award in 7 categories, one of them dedicated for the solution, data, climate justice, and other topic, to encourage more journalists from our region to write about climate and write different aspects. For example, there is also a category for podcast, for investigation, for multimedia. We want to encourage the journalists from our region to start to create different formats and to work on human nice stories. One of the things I want to mention about the climate justice, when we report about climate justice, this an important thing to keep in mind. We shouldn't show women all the time as victims. It's important to show their vulnerability, and it's important to show how they suffer from different aspects. But also, we need to show them as leaders of a change. We need to show the statistics and the figures that show when we empower women, when we make women engage in the climate action, that will not only enhance their own lives, but they help their communities to build the resilience. So we need to change this image for women that all the time they are victims, they are not have to do nothing, and other people create solutions for them. Because in the reality, in different places in the world, in Africa, in the North Africa, in the Middle East, in different places, women are on the front line to face climate change, and they have their own solution to do. I think I'm run out of time, so I will end here. Thank you.
I appreciate you all being so dutiful on the time. Thank you, Rahma. It was wonderful to hear from you. And now I turn it over to Amy Goodman.
Oh, well, I want to just first say what an honor it is to be with all of you. I want to thank Osprey. I want to thank Antonia for moderating this. To follow Rahma is such an honor, and Amy and Elizabeth. Also hearing about Mexico and the kind of organizing that's going on there. This is truly the hope. And to hear about a climate school. Every time people take action, democracy is a little more in our grasp, which brings me to democracy now. We're about to celebrate our 30th anniversary. We started as the only daily grassroots global unembedded independent international investigative news hour at the time in 1996, covering the election in the United States. And who would know we would get to this point? We started on 9 stations, thought we'd be done after the election, but the response after that election was so intense. People hearing people speaking from their own experience. There is nothing more powerful. I mean, I think about just a news headline of last week that is not just a news headline. It is the story of Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 other minority rights Ogoni activists in Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa, who were executed in 1995 as they took on one of the most powerful oil companies in the world, the Shell Corporation. A sham trial, then killed. I had met Ken a bit before that, about a year before that, when he took the issue of Shell working in the Niger Delta, destroying the mangrove forests, destroying people's livelihoods because of the pollution. He had come to the United States, and when we interviewed him on Democracy Now!, he said, "I am a marked man." Went back to Nigeria, and they were very soon after that captured and put on trial. Well, in this last week, Ken and the others have been pardoned posthumously. The government didn't apologize for what happened to them, but I think the people of Nigeria and people around the world understand well what it means when powerful multinationals, in this case, oil corporations, combine with the government, that kind of corporate government nexus. Well, I was about to say there's nothing more powerful, but there is a force more powerful. It is people all over the planet joining together for a more just and climate just future. which brings me to what we were doing 10 years ago, 9 years ago in 2016. April 1st, 2016, you had the gathering of people, indigenous people in North Dakota, the standoff at Standing Rock. The late LaDonna Brave Bull Aller, the unofficial historian of the Standing Rock Sioux, invited people. She thought maybe a dozen people would come or 24 people. She said, you can come to my land, set up your teepees, set up your tents, and help us take on the Dakota Access Pipeline. Because as people gathered, they talked about it threatening the water supply. As they said, water is life, of millions of people, not just indigenous Native American people, but everyone downstream in the Missouri River, the longest river in North America. And they said, we cannot do this alone. Not just a couple dozen people, not just a couple hundred people, not just a couple thousand people. Thousands gathered. It was the largest Native American, indigenous, First Nations gathering our country had seen in decades. People came from the First Nations in Canada, from throughout Latin America, from around the world, indigenous and non-indigenous, set up these resistance camps. And Democracy Now! Was covering it from afar, but then Labor Day weekend of 2016, when it was Trump versus Hillary Clinton, there wasn't one question asked in the presidential debates, forget around the standoff at Standing Rock, which was historic, but there wasn't a question asked about the climate issue. I would talk when I was invited on MSNBC or CNN to the anchors and the commercials, the commercials for Chevron and Shell and the military contractors. Why don't you cover the climate more? And they would say, we want to, but the executives say that the eyes would glaze over of our audience. Really? Well, we went there Labor Day weekend of 2016, and we followed a group of people who were trying to protect what they called their sacred land. And they didn't think anyone was going to be bulldozing then, but in fact, there were 6 bulldozers. They were moving forward. They were already excavating, digging up for DAPL, for the Dakota Access Pipeline. And hundreds of people, girls, older women, men, boys, came onto the property, and they stood in front of those earth-crushing bulldozers, risking their own lives. And the bulldozers had to pull back. Then the guards used dogs, and they went after the protesters. They were biting them. They were macing them. And ultimately, though, people didn't stop. They moved forward. The guards had to take their dogs. The bulldozer crane operators, they all had to move away. And the people triumphed at that moment. But we filmed the dogs with their nose, their snouts, their mouths covered in blood. And this was the answer. And you all have found this as you also train journalists, that we had to go back to New York. We posted that video online. Within 24 hours, there were 14 million views. Any corporate executive of any network would have drooled to get that kind of viewership because people cared. And the president at the time was President Obama. And it wasn't lost on him. By the way, he was in Laos and had this historic trip, and he held a school for young people. And they started to ask him, what about what's happening, that standoff at Standing Rock? They were seeing the video online. He said, I'll have to go back to the White House and check, though he did know what was going on. And we understood when he came back, he saw the video. And it wasn't lost on the first African-American president of the United States what it meant to sick dogs on activists. We knew it from the civil rights era. And that's such an important point to bring to today. A couple days later, there was going to be a judge ruling on this case. That's why the bulldozers were trying to dig up before, to make the point moot. They were going to do it in advance. And right before the judge ruled, the authorities in North Dakota issued an arrest warrant for me. For me? I mean, we were just showing the images, and that is absolutely critical. And I know this, you feel this way for everyone. It doesn't just has to be official journalists, citizen journalists showing the images. You know, Mamie Till Mobley understood it when her dear son, Emmett Till, was lynched by a white mob in Money, Mississippi in 1955, when his body was dredged up from the Tallahatchie River and sent back to Chicago. She said, "Do not hide him in a casket." And she had the casket open at the wake and the funeral for the world to see the ravages of racism, the brutality of bigotry. And millions saw, because a Black publication, Jet Magazine, photographed his distended head, beaten up, a 14-year-old boy. She had something very important to teach the press of today. She had very important to teach the world. Show the images, show the casualties of whether we're talking about war or whether we're talking about environmental war, environmental catastrophe. We have to show it all. And we have to show, and I think we're all finding this now, for me in the United States, as Antonia is in the United States, Trump is connecting all of the issues. And I think we all find everyone has to link up, because we are experiencing a level of immigration raids we never saw before, right? People being rounded up, ICE raids, masked, hooded people. Why am I raising this in a climate discussion? Why are people leaving their countries, whether in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and trying to make their way north, or trying to make their way to the most powerful country on earth, to the United States? Because we are most responsible for climate change. Some people are politically persecuted, others are leaving their countries because of, I mean, look, sub-Saharan Africa, the desertification of Africa because of climate change. Who is historically the worst polluter? The United States. And we have to take responsibility for this. And in the media, I see it as our job. Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, or on social media, Insta or Facebook or YouTube. You can find us all of these places now. Millions of people viewing every day. By the way, I see the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day. And we've got to break the sound barrier. Hear people at the target end, not that little circle of pundits you get on television. I bet you get it in all your countries too. We're not alone. This little circle of pundits who know so little about so much, explaining the world to us and getting it so wrong. No, we have to go to people at the target end, whether we're talking about in Kenya, whether we're talking about in Mexico, in Colombia, whether we're talking about in Egypt, whether we're talking about anywhere in the world, and have people describe their own experience. That's the power of the media. We must show the images, and most people respond to that. The majority is on the side of justice.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much, Amy. That was absolutely wonderful. And being on the side of justice is a beautiful place to end. I would love to let you keep going, but we're running out of time. Thank you for that. We've been given more time from the moderators, by the way, from WECAN, so we're going to be able to go until 12 minutes after the hour, so a bit more time to have questions. And so I'm just going to dive right in and ask you all. We'll go, and I'm going to actually start with Rahma on this question. I want to talk about the challenges we're facing right now and how you're overcoming them. I think most people in the audience and journalists right now are feeling, we're trying to work against a very aggressive stream of autocracy, of information, of news. Can you please talk about what you see as the largest challenges, both to your work and globally, and some ways that you overcome them? And then we'll work through asking others to answer as well. Thank you, Rahma.
Thank you. I think one of the most challenge we face as journalists is the lack of information, the lack of resources who are open to speak and to share their knowledge. Also, the lack of the specialized platform. I'm a journalist. I'm working in the field since 2009, and I have more than 10 awards, and I still face difficulty to find the platform to publish my reports because I talk about something, about a topic. It's not important for the media outlets in my region. So most of the time I have to publish in foreign media. I have to create opportunities. One of the reasons we create climate school is to face these challenges, to create opportunities, to create production grant, to create competition, to encourage journalists to report about climate change. Because if they didn't do this, there is no more people we will do. There is no platform will encourage them to write about the climate change. As I mentioned, it's a matter of seasonal reporting during the COP, during the um, conferences, but the day-by-day coverage, no one is talking about climate change or interested to talk about. But if I told you women and climate, gender, climate justice, this is the topic people don't know. They didn't know what the meaning of this topic. So they don't care. So this is why we try to overcome this challenging by try to create opportunities for me and for my college in the region by collaborating with organization, with networks who can support our work, who can support us to create more training, to create more production grants, more opportunities for journalists. Um, I hope I answered your question.
That was excellent. And I think that's important for those who are eager to get us to report to understand how difficult it is just to do the type of reporting that we're being asked to do, and the challenges we face. Catalina, I'll pose the same question to you.
I would say the biggest challenge is the founding of the human rights and independent journalism ecosystem, which in Latin America are very intertwined. In Latin America, this ecosystem is very dependent on USAID, or was very dependent on, and philanthropy that comes from the United States. That more than philanthropy and more than aid, these are actually kind of reparations because of the impact the United States have had on the region. And most independent media depends on this, and we're being defunding, and we're seeing I've seen during this year at least 10 independent outlets close. Most of them are reducing their newsrooms in 60, 80%. I mean, it is huge. And these are people that did a very specific job, that were trained in a very specific skill. And every journalist is also a network of sources that depend on this person. And these stories are not going to be told anymore. And we really cannot expect corporate media to investigate corporations. And this is one of the biggest problems for democracies right now, is that corporations are bigger and more powerful than states, and they are seeking deregulation. They are seeking cut in social spending and privatization and shrinking of the states. That's not only happening in a government like Trump's in the United States, but you can see antecedents of that in Bukele, in Milei, in Argentina. And this is a huge trend that's going around the region, and it's going to be very dangerous for us.
Real quick before I let you go, some solutions you see to this problem, Catalina.
Um, Gosh, I don't still have a solution about the funding of social media. I think that what we are all doing is we're trying to survive at least 2 years. Something has to change somewhere. There's something that's beautiful about community organization in Latin America is that we've always done this even before we had the opportunity of having funds. And it's still going to keep on happening. But we have to ask about the conditions because we have to remember that human rights defenders and activists, we are also doing care work. We're taking care of other people, we're taking care of the planet, and as all care work, this is underfunded. This is seen as something you do because it's your vocation or just because it is good. And people who do this work really deserve to live at least lives that are dignified and where they have enough to have a roof over their heads and take care of their families also. So I think we have a huge crisis, but I really hope that next year we're going to start to see other possibilities. And definitely, we really have to organize against the rise of authoritarian governments. Sexist misinformation is one of the key tools that authoritarian governments are using to get to power. And we really have to try to stop that in other countries because we have already seen what it does.
Well, thank you, Catalina. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Very, very important question, Antonia, in the context of what we're discussing now, and really double down on what my fellow panelists have said and the real challenges on this, which we are very much alive to. So really, climate is not, as I said earlier, when it comes to the media, like where I am in Africa, a bit far removed from what's happening in the US, but you can see the pattern. When it comes to climate, it's about how relevant is it to the issues of the day, right? And up until we're able to tell that story in a way that weaves what's happening into the realities that people are dealing with at the moment, it is something we've found to be work to work in some ways, right? It doesn't work all the time, but it does work in some ways because then people are, I mean, I always sometimes say you can actually talk about climate and make people take action on climate without even mentioning climate, right? If you take action on food security, what are the measures we need to take? What are the measures we need to take to help Africans without energy access energy through renewables, right? You are practically showing how to take action on climate without mentioning that. I think also people sometimes, because of not being able to piece that story in ways that relate, in ways that people see how this affects their day-to-day lives, they think of climate as something for scientists, something for the elite, right? And we want to bring it to the day-to-day lives of people. But sometimes even talking about climate, climate change, there's no local languages for climate change, right? So you get people to describe climate change with how they've seen lives change, or the patterns, the seasons, the productivity change. And so you use their description to talk about climate change in ways that they understand. And it's up until we get our local people, women, to really talk about these things and care about them, then we have our leaders also taking note. And also it helps to make sure that our leaders do not take advantage of the lack of salience or lack of knowledge to say there's nothing like climate and we cannot take action, because people know it's real and it affects them, and so they hold them to account. One other way we are dealing with what's happening at the moment, sometimes when we pitch stories to international media, they're turned down because they do not have the political angles of the day. They don't have the voices that are salient at the moment. And so our stories get turned down. And so my challenge is always, what's our definition of international media? Actually, a lot of the media we call international is largely US or Europe media, right? International includes what we are hearing from Mexico, from Africa, from Kenya, from regional media. And so how do we bring salience? How do we make this regional and local media also become part of the international media ecosystem, where we can also pitch stories and they are read? And also another way we are handling it is new media, right? What are the other avenues, especially through digital? You can really target audience specifically with the action you need them to take. And yeah, that's one of some of the ways in which we're dealing with the challenges.
It's extremely excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. And just so you know, Amy Westervelt, you're going to have about a minute and a half to answer. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is that news is still most often framed in the mainstream media as created by white US or European Northern men. That's what news means, right? And we are constantly still challenging that framework. Amy Westervelt, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, oh God, biggest problem. In 1 minute, time, funding, it's all of those things. I actually do see a really big issue in the continuous blurring of the lines between journalism and comms. It's constant, and funders do it all the time. Like, they do not understand that there's a difference. And the reason I mention it is that, like, doing investigative journalism takes time, as you know, Antonia. It takes so much time to do an investigative story. And, if you can't pay people to do it, then it's just not going to get done. It's not going to get done. And I actually think that, like, people often create this false dichotomy between really deeply researched stuff and, like, social media and fun videos. No, I actually think the videos and the social and the everything, like the films and the podcasts and everything that do the best. I mean, I think this is why our stuff has been successful, is that we spend like 2 years researching a podcast that sounds like really snappy and fun, but there are a lot of receipts behind it. And I think that actually helps to break through. And if you can't keep, like, we have a journalist now who's doing a story on the Energy Transfer versus Greenpeace case, which is like the end result of the backlash to Standing Rock, right? She has done an amazing job because she's been covering that story since 2016. So she can do this really incredible, really, like, deep story now because she has those relationships with the tribe, and she has those relationships with all these people that, aren't talking to anybody else. And you don't get that without funding it. You just, yeah. Anyway.
Thank you,
It.
Amy. So
More than
important.
a
And
minute.
Amy Goodman, I didn't know you were still here. Amy
Yay.
Goodman, to you to wrap us up. Now is when Osprey's going to try and cut us off, but I really want to hear from you again. I thought you'd
Just
left. So
60
back to you.
seconds. Just 60 seconds. I just want to say our motto used to be to go to where the silence is. But as Catalina and Elizabeth and Amy and Rahma and you always, Antonia, have shown us, it's not silent there. It's raucous, it's loud, people are organizing. It just doesn't hit the corporate media radar screen. I call it trickle up journalism, and people should send us story ideas all the time. Democracy Now! Is a great place where, with a global platform, we can link up people all over the planet. But I think all of you are doing it all of the time. It is no more important time than right now. Every movement together, joining together for climate justice, for overall racial and economic justice.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And Antonia and the entire panel has been just outstanding. Thank you all so much for the work that you do. And I just wanted to end by saying, it's really inspiring to hear kind of behind the curtain a little bit what all of you are doing as journalists, as storytellers, and to me, activists in the field. It is a form of activism and resistance, as I said earlier. And I think that, one of the reflections I would give before we close is that, as we're seeing resistance to the takeover of countries, of governments, of a lot of our institutions, that part of this time of evolution and revolution is also in who owns the narrative. We shouldn't be having to only listen to white European and folks from the United States leading out what the story is about, as Antonia and all of you said in different ways. And that's going to happen because of the work all of you are doing. And we need to change the entire way our narratives are being told and who's telling them and what stories we're hearing, which is what you're doing, because it is part of democracy. It is part of the world that we seek with justice, well-being, and care for all. So we applaud you. We thank you for taking time with us today, and we send you all the support in the world to continue doing the work that you do. It's critical. It's absolutely critical. Thank you so much. Appreciate everyone's time.